The purpose of this module is to provide an overview of floodplain management. The following topics will be discussed: a description of the floodplain and the benefits of a floodplain, the floodplain manager's responsibilities, types of flooding, the National Flood Insurance Program, the community rating system, the Community Assistance Program, floodplain ordinances, structural and non-structural best management practices, floodproofing, buyouts, FEMA grant opportunities, and local floodplain management resources. Historically, people have been attracted to bodies of water as places for living, commerce, and recreation. Locations near water provide necessary access to transportation, water supply, and power. This pattern of development has continued as communities have grown. Unfortunately, loss of lives, injuries, and damage and destruction of buildings, personal belongings, and infrastructure can result from flooding. Floodplain management is the operation of a community program of corrective and preventative measures for reducing flood damage. These measures take a variety of forms and generally include requirements for zoning, subdivision or building, and special purpose floodplain ordinances. The responsibility for reducing flood losses is shared by all units of government, local, state, and federal, and the private sector. A community's agreement to adopt and enforce floodplain management ordinances, particularly with respect to new construction, is an important element in making flood insurance available to home and business owners. Currently, over 20,500 communities in the United States voluntarily adopt and enforce local floodplain management ordinances that provide flood loss reduction building standards for new and existing development. Responsibilities of floodplain managers include explaining floodplain concepts, developing mitigation actions, monitoring flooding locations, and implementing flood warning systems and emergency response plans and procedures. Floodplain managers are from a variety of backgrounds, and local floodplain managers are often responsible for multiple duties within local government. The Association of State Floodplain Managers offers training and an exam to become a certified floodplain manager. The exam study guide offers guidance documents specifically written for the local officials who are responsible for administering his or her community's floodplain management regulations. The Kentucky Association of Mitigation Managers also provides support for local floodplain managers. Floodplain managers are expected to educate elected officials, community members, and the general public about flooding risks to create flood-resistant and resilient communities, including natural and beneficial floodplain functions, flood studies and maps, NFIP rules and regulations, regulatory standards, ordinance administration, flood insurance, and hazard mitigation. Floods are a part of the Earth's natural hydrologic cycle. They occur when the hydrologic cycle gets out of balance, sending more water to an area than it can normally handle. When a channel receives too much water, the excess flows over its banks and into the adjacent floodplain, called riverine flooding. Watershed terrain determines the dynamics of riverine flooding. Floodplains are a naturally occurring part of an ecosystem and are serving a purpose. The plants and wildlife that are found in a floodplain also serve beneficial purposes. The natural function of floodplains are to provide flood storage and conveyance, reduce flood velocities, peak flows, and sedimentation, filter nutrients and reduce temperature fluctuations, promote groundwater infiltration and aquifer recharge, promote vegetation growth through rich alluvial soils, maintain biodiversity and integrity of ecosystems, create and enhance wildlife habitat, and protect habitats for rare and endangered species. Human development can have an adverse impact on floods and floodplains. The most obvious impact of development on riverine flooding comes with moving or altering channels or constructing bridges and culverts with small openings. Construction and regrading of the floodplain can obstruct or divert water to other areas. Levees and dikes are the best known examples of this, but even small construction projects can have an impact. Filling obstructs flood flows, backing up floodwaters onto upstream and adjacent properties. It also reduces the floodplain's ability to store excess water, sending more water downstream and causing floods to rise to higher levels. This also increases flood water velocity. The NFIP addresses this issue through regulating the regulatory floodway, which means the channel of a river or other watercourse and the adjacent land areas that must be reserved in order to discharge the base flood without cumulatively increasing the water surface elevation more than a designated height. The most common type of flooding in the United States is called overbank flooding. Overbank flooding occurs when downstream channels receive more rain or snowmelt from their watershed than normal, or a channel is blocked by an ice jam or debris. Overbank flooding varies with the watershed size and terrain. One measure of a flood is the velocity, which is measured in feet per second. Hilly and mountainous areas have faster moving waters, so velocity can pose a serious hazard and reduce how much warning people have that a flood is building. In flat areas, the flood may move slowly, making its velocity less of a hazard. Generally, the larger the river, the deeper the flood, and the longer it will last. However, in hilly or mountainous areas with narrow valleys, flooding can be very deep in small watersheds. Depending on the size of the river and terrain of its floodplain, flooding can last for days and cover wide areas. A severe storm that drops a lot of rainfall in a short time can generate a flash flood. All flash floods strike quickly and end swiftly. While flash floods occur in all 50 states, areas with steep slopes and narrow stream valleys are particularly vulnerable, like those in eastern Kentucky, as are the banks of small tributary systems. In hilly areas, the high-velocity flows and short warning time make flash floods hazardous and very destructive. In urban areas, flash flooding can occur where impervious surfaces, gutters, and storm sewers speed runoff. Flash floods also can be caused by dam failure, the release of ice jam flooding, or collapse of debris dams. Flash floods rank first as the cause of flood-related deaths in the United States. River channels change as water moves downstream, acting on the channel banks and on the channel bottom, called the thaw weg. This force is made more potent during a flood when the river's velocity increases. Several features along a river are affected by this flow of water in different ways. A meander is a curve in a channel. On the outside of the meander, the banks are subject to erosion as the water scours against them. However, areas on the inside of meanders receive deposits of sand and sediment transferred from the eroded sides. Properties on the outside of curves face a double threat of inundation and undercutting from riverine erosion during floods. In addition, meanders do not stay in the same place. They migrate slowly downstream and across the floodplain, reworking the shape of the channel within the floodplain. An urban drainage system comprises the ditches, storm sewers, and retention ponds and other facilities constructed to store runoff or carry it to a receiving stream, lake, or the ocean. Other man-made features in such a system include yards and swales that collect runoff and direct it to the sewers and ditches. When most of these systems were built, they were typically designed to handle the amount of water expected during a 10% annual chance or 10-year storm. Larger storms overload them, and the resulting backed-up sewers and overloaded ditches produce flooding. Another urban drainage problem occurs in the areas protected by levees. To drain these areas, channels have been built and pumps installed to mechanically move the water past the levee. Urban features alter flood dynamics as well. Storm sewers and more efficient ditches that come with urban drainage systems speed flood flow. The result of urbanization is that there's more runoff in the watershed and it moves faster, increasing flooding downstream. Thus, a 10% annual chance or 10-year storm may produce the runoff equivalent to a 4% annual chance or 25-year storm, overloading the man-made drainage system. Development in riverine watersheds affects the runoff of stormwater and snowmelt. Buildings and parking lots replace the natural vegetation which used to absorb water. When rain falls in a natural setting, as much as 90% of it will infiltrate the ground. In an urbanized area, as much as 90% of it will run off. The increase in runoff rates illustrated on this slide is based on conditions in the Midwestern United States. The National Flood Insurance Program provides a framework and minimum requirements for local floodplain management programs. Administered by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Congress created the NFIP in 1968 to change the national response to flood disasters. The NFIP has accomplished the following: established an insurance program as an alternative to disaster relief, distributed responsibility for floodplain management to all levels of government and the private sector, set a national standard for regulating new development in floodplains, and began a comprehensive floodplain mapping program. Each state has an NFIP coordinator to assist the implementation of NFIP encouraged practices. Benefits of NFIP participation include the ability for property owners to insure against flood losses. Improved floodplain management results in reduced risks of loss of life and property damage or loss, and improved management of development in the floodplains results in reduced monetary losses. A community participating in the NFIP generally has a flood insurance rate map, or a FIRM. A FIRM usually is based on a flood insurance study and includes flood elevations and other hazard information needed to better protect new construction from flood damage. Properties within the Special Flood Hazard Area have lower insurance premiums than those outside the Special Flood Hazard Area. The NFIP provides lower rates to participating communities who meet floodplain management criteria of the Community Rating System. To understand the available benefits, property owners need to understand where the flood hazard areas are within their communities. NFIP coverage is available to all owners of eligible property located in a community participating in the NFIP. Owners and renters may insure their property against flood loss. Insurance is mandatory when the mortgage lender of a building in the special flood hazard area is a federally regulated, supervised, or insured financial institution for the acquisition or improvement of land, facilities, or structures. The NFIP underwrites flood insurance coverage only in those communities that adopt and enforce floodplain regulations that meet or exceed NFIP criteria. Buildings built in accordance with these regulations have a lower risk of flooding and can be insured at lower rates. The community's floodplain regulations are designed to ensure that new buildings will be protected from the flood levels shown on the flood insurance rate map, and that development will not make the flood hazard worse. FEMA can impose sanctions on the community to encourage it to correct its floodplain management program. Communities have the ability to lower flood insurance premiums through participation and credits in the community rating system. The community rating system is a voluntary program which implements higher floodplain management standards. It provides an opportunity for communities to obtain a discount on flood insurance policies for their residents, between 5 and 45% discount on the annual premium by recognizing additional efforts to reduce flood damage to insurable property, strengthen and support the insurance aspects of the NFIP, and encourage comprehensive approach to floodplain management. If a community participates in the CRS, the community is responsible for designating a community CRS coordinator, cooperating with the designated CRS representative, and recertifying each year that it is continuing to implement its activities. The coordinator will also advise FEMA and its CRS representative of modifications to its activities, including keeping elevation certificates, old flood insurance rate maps, and old flood insurance studies for as long as the community is in the CRS, keeping the records iterated in the activities documentation sections until they are reviewed at the verification visit, and ensuring that flood protection projects and drainage system maintenance activities are compliant with federal environmental and historic preservation requirements, and participating in the cycle verification process. No fee is charged for a community to apply for participation in the CRS. The only costs the community incurs are those of implementing creditable floodplain management activities and the staff time needed to document those activities and prepare for and participate in the recertification process and verification visits. There are many benefits to participating in the CRS. Some benefits more commonly mentioned by community officials include the benefit that attracts people to the CRS the most is the reduction in flood insurance premiums for their residents and businesses. Although the premium reduction attracts interest in the CRS, the most important benefits are the enhanced public safety, reduction in property damage, and reduction in human suffering. Through the CRS, a community can evaluate the effectiveness of its flood program against state and nationally recognized benchmarks. Training and technical assistance in designing and implementing credited flood protection activities are available through the CRS at no charge. The Community Assistance Program, or CAP, is a product-oriented financial assistance program directly related to the flood loss reduction objectives of the National Flood Insurance Program. The National Flood Insurance Program prohibits FEMA from providing flood insurance in a community unless that community adopts and enforces floodplain management measures that meet or exceed minimum criteria. A few of the fundable CAP activities include entering floodplain management data into the Community Information System, strategic planning, ordinance assistance, CAP gap analysis, community assistance visits and community assistance contacts, outreach, workshops, and other training, general technical assistance, mapping coordination assistance, coordination with other state programs and agencies, and assistance to communities in responding to disasters. Once FEMA provides a community with the flood hazard information upon which floodplain management regulations are based, the community is required to adopt a floodplain management ordinance that meets or exceeds the minimum NFIP requirements. Ordinance is the generic term for a law passed by a local government. In some states, it's called a bylaw. The overriding purpose of the floodplain management regulations is to ensure that participating communities take into account flood hazards to the extent that they are known in all official actions relating to land management and use. The specific requirements are in Section 60.3 of the NFIP regulations and apply to communities. In addition to ordinance enforcement, communities can enforce best management practices. Floodplain ordinances are generally located in one of the following: zoning ordinances, building codes, subdivision regulations, sanitary regulations, or as standalone ordinances. Floodplain ordinances should have the following provisions: purpose, definitions, adoption of flood data, requirement for a development permit, construction standards. standards for manufactured or mobile homes, construction standards for the specific flood zones in the community, construction in the floodway and standards for encroachments where floodways are not mapped, standards for subdivisions, standards for water and sewer service, and rules on water course alterations. The Kentucky Division of Water maintains a model ordinance for those communities who wish to use it as a template for their own floodplain ordinances. When developing in or near the floodplain, it is important to remember that local requirements may be more stringent. Generally speaking, development is regulated on the local level. Therefore, it is always suggested to consult with local officials regarding local development requirements. Floodplain management ordinances, zoning and planning ordinances, building codes and ordinances, and design manuals provide local requirements and guidelines for development. Urban development can significantly impact watersheds by increasing runoff and pollutant loading. Best management practices is a term used to describe a type of protection of water resources, protection of public health, and flood control. They can be designed to address the full range of hydrologic conditions to minimize flooding impacts. Types include structural and non-structural projects. Examples are infiltration devices, filters, and constructed wetlands, and non-structural controls such as maintenance practices, street sweeping, public education, and outreach programs. Specifically, stormwater management strategies can include low-impact development practices such as bioretention facilities, rain gardens, vegetated rooftops, rainwater harvesting such as using rain barrels and cisterns, and permeable pavements. The images on this slide demonstrate examples of structural flood protection measures including a flood wall and a levee. Also, during the 1960s and 70s, interest increased in protecting and restoring the environment, including the natural resources and functions of floodplains. Coordinating flood loss reduction programs with environmental protection and watershed management programs has since become a major goal of federal, state, and local programs. Consequently, administrators have several non-structural flood protection measures at their disposal. They include regulations to prohibit development in high-hazard areas, building codes requiring flood-resistant construction for new buildings in flood-prone areas, green space in flood-prone areas, acquisition and relocation of buildings in high-hazard areas, modifying or retrofitting existing buildings, installing flood warning systems, controlling stormwater runoff, and education and outreach to property owners to reduce flood risk. There are two kinds of floodproofing, wet floodproofing and dry floodproofing. The distinction between the two is that wet floodproofing allows the internal flooding of a structure, where dry floodproofing creates an essentially watertight protection. FEMA does not buy houses directly from the property owners. Acquisition or buyout projects, while 75% funded by FEMA, are administered by the state and local communities. The state and local communities work together to identify areas where buyouts make the most sense. Buyouts are an important way to reduce the risk of future disasters. Money is limited, and in most cases, the amount of money set aside for mitigation cannot meet all the mitigation needs following a disaster. States prioritize mitigation programs with input from the communities. Property acquisition is one of many forms of hazard mitigation, but it is the most permanent form. It removes people from harm's way forever. In a property acquisition project, the community buys private property, acquires the title to it, and then clears it. By law, that property, which is now public property, must forever remain open space land. The community can use it to create public parks and wildlife refuges, but it cannot sell it to private individuals nor develop it. Property acquisitions work the same way as any other real estate transaction. Property owners who want to sell their properties will be given fair prices for them. It's a terrific opportunity for people who live in or near hazard areas to get to safer ground. Record keeping is necessary to document compliance with the National Flood Insurance Program and to create a paper trail to appropriately manage a local floodplain program. Variances through zoning ordinances, elevation certificates, floodproofing certificates, and no-rise certifications are examples of some of the documents that a floodplain administrator must maintain. Several resources are available to assist property owners needing to identify whether their property is in the special flood hazard area. Floodwaters and risk do not stop at map boundaries. Monitoring developments that may alter the floodplain boundaries is a key concept of floodplain management. Residents and property owners in close proximity to the floodplain have higher flooding risk and should understand where their property is located on a digital flood insurance rate map. Digital information can be viewed at FEMA's Map Service Center website. Local insurance agents and local government offices, such as building permit departments or planning review, can also access the effective flood insurance rate maps. Also, the Kentucky Division of Water has created a new mapping portal to access the state's digital data. It is common for local floodplain managers to assist the public with determining whether a structure is in the floodplain. The Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, or HMGP, provides grants to states and local governments to implement long-term hazard mitigation measures after a major disaster declaration. HMGP was created to reduce the loss of life and property due to natural disasters. The PDM program, or Pre-Disaster Mitigation, provides funds to states and communities for hazard mitigation planning and the implementation of mitigation projects prior to a disaster event. Some of the projects can include community safe rooms, drainage, and property elevation. The Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, or FMA, is designed to reduce or eliminate the long-term risk of flooding of structures insured through the National Flood Insurance Program. FEMA provides FMA funds to assist states and communities to implement mitigation measures that reduce or eliminate the long-term risk of flood damage to buildings, manufactured homes, and other structures insurable under the NFIP. The Kentucky Division of Water provides a myriad of education and outreach opportunities for the public. The Division of Water has a dedicated risk communication specialist available for contact at kyriskmap@ky.gov. The Commonwealth's floodplain mapping information is coming to ifloodrisk.ky.gov, where the public can view Kentucky's digital data. The Division of Water's Water Watch program is dedicated to helping you protect Kentucky's streams, rivers, lakes, and wetlands. The program accomplishes its goals through community education initiatives, community leadership, community action, and water quality monitoring projects. Floodsmart.gov is the official site of the NFIP. Links to national guidance and FEMA's Risk Map program are available to the public. The next few slides provide examples of some of the tools and guidance documents that are available in Kentucky communities. The Know Your Line, Be Flood Aware High Watermark Initiative was created by FEMA and 7 other federal agencies. It helps communities remind residents of major local floods and encourage residents to prepare for the next one. Participating communities post high water mark signs in prominent places, hold a high-profile launch event to unveil the signs, and conduct ongoing education to build local awareness of flood risk and motivate people to take action. FrankfurtEMA.org is Frankfurt's website for the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. The public can sign up to receive emergency notifications and learn about current river conditions. The purpose of mitigation planning is to identify policies and actions that can be implemented over the long term to reduce risk and future losses. Mitigation plans form the foundation for a community's long-term strategy to reduce disaster losses and break the cycle of disaster damage, reconstruction, and repeated damage. States, local, and tribal governments benefit from mitigation planning by identifying cost-effective actions for risk reductions that are agreed upon by stakeholders and the public, focusing resources on the greatest risks and vulnerabilities, building partnerships by involving people, organizations, and businesses, increasing education and awareness of hazards and risk, communicating priorities to state and federal officials, and aligning risk reduction with other community objectives. Communities must have a mitigation plan to apply for or receive a mitigation grant. These grants can augment local mitigation activities already being conducted. Louisville's Metropolitan Sewer District, or MSD, has a robust floodplain management program. This program includes resources related to customer service, drainage requests, elevation certificates, floodplain regulations, and floodproofing materials, among others. The LexingtonKY.gov website hosts floodplain protection resources and ways for the public to get involved in protecting their community. The City of Bowling Green website provides local information about Warren County, hosts FEMA guidance materials, and educates the public about local landscape issues such as karsts or cavernous terrain and sinkholes that can contribute to flooding issues. The Kentucky Division of Water website hosts much information about the National Flood Insurance Program and floodplain management. To support the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA's goals by improving the competencies of the U.S. officials in emergency management at all levels of government to prepare for, protect against, respond to, recover from, and mitigate the potential effects of all types of disasters and emergencies, EMI is the Emergency Management Community's flagship training institution and provides training to federal, state, local, tribal, volunteer, public, and private sector officials to strengthen emergency management core competencies for professional career-long training. EMI directly supports the implementation of the National Incident Management System, the National Response Framework, the National Disaster Recovery Framework, and the National Preparedness Goal. EMI trains more than 2 million students annually using residential on-site training, off-site partnerships with emergency management training systems, colleges, universities, and technology-based mediums. Training opportunities may include National Flood Insurance Program Community Rating System, how to use firms and other data, and retrofitting flood-prone buildings. EMI is located on the campus of the National Emergency Training Center in Emmitsburg, Maryland. For more information, please consult the resources shown on the slide. This concludes our learning module on floodplain management.